It is our sincere hope at Machon Shilo, led by Rabbi David Bar-Hayim, that these discussions with the symbol of self-sacrifice and Jewish heroism, Yehonathan Pollard, will contribute towards the awakening of the Jewish nation and lead to the final redemption without further unnecessary tragedies. Welcome, Yehonathan.
Thank you. Shalom.
Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom to all our viewers and to my friend Yehonathan Pollard. Good to be with you again.
Likewise.
We have the Jewish festival of Purim coming up in a matter of days, and perhaps we'll find time to speak about that towards the end, today. You mentioned to me in our pre-recording conversation that you wanted specifically to speak about the festival that comes after Purim, that is to say Pesach, or in English, Passover.
Correct.
Let's hear about that.
The Passover that I'm referring to has to do with a scandal that just occurred, where the chief of staff, the Ramatkal, Chetzi Halevi, against advice to the contrary, went ahead and promoted 50 officers, none of whom were religious, which was not accidental or coincidental. It was purposeful. So in a sense, they were passed over. Why is this so terrible? Apart from the fact that everybody who was in a position to influence General Halevi argued against this, because it was at most inappropriate that officers, generals, who are implicated in the disaster that occurred on October 7th should not be at liberty before the Commission of Inquiry rules for culpability, rules on the issue of culpability, to have the right to promote people. Okay? Basically, the argument that Bezalel Smotrich made, and I agree with him in this matter 100%, was that all these individuals have to go, who are in the high command that were responsible. We're not asking for them to go. We're asking for them to fight this war and to win it, and then either stand before the commission and take their punishment, or to leave, resign. Now, General Brick, on the other hand, has been quite clear, and I kind of agree with him on this one, that these generals absolutely have to go.
I most definitely have stated this clearly from the very beginning of the war. Of course, I've been saying it for years, but certainly since the war broke out, and the clear responsibility, culpability, and blame that can and must be placed at the footstep of so many of these senior military officials and commanders. I've never felt that it was the right decision to try and fight the war with these people still in command.
Correct. The bottom line on this is the people who were responsible for this are not the people who we can trust to win this war. And I keep referring back to President Abraham Lincoln of the United States and the problems that he encountered with generals that were just totally incompetent, that really didn't want the North to win, that felt more of an affinity for the South and their principles than for the North and theirs. All of these problems. And that he had the strength to go ahead and go through generals until he found two, Sherman and Grant, that would fight to win. Okay, so what are we doing now? Well, I am not been pleased at all with the way this war has been going. Forget the North for a minute. The war in Gaza has been so totally mismanaged that on that basis alone, I would start firing people immediately, starting with Finkelman and Halawi the intelligence head of military intelligence.
Haliwa, you mean?
Haliwa,
Haliwa.
yeah. These people, get rid of them. But there are two issues here that we have to grapple with. I have read very carefully leaked discussions, cabinet discussions, as everyone else has. I'm not the only one privy to them, between people like Halevi and Gallant and cabinet members who were in disagreements. And the arrogance of the army is extraordinary. They think, just like the High Court, that they are a law unto themselves. They don't understand of accountability to the elected government.
They don't think. I'm sorry, Jonathan. They don't think. They are.
No, well, they don't think. But
they
there was
are.
an old.
That is the reality.
Right.
That has always been the reality in Israel.
Right. And this is what led to October 7th and 73 for that matter. I mean, there was a statement that came out of World War I where it went as follows: war is too important to be left to the generals. Okay. And we have that situation now. So it's not just the notion of the accountability of the military to the government, the civilian government, but their arrogant attitude towards anyone who questions them. A minister, let me tell you something. If these guys were in any other parliamentary government and they answered ministers the way our generals have, they would have been booted out immediately. I mean, I remember very well with my father walking into the White House after Vietnam, after his tour there, a general walking out a colonel. It was that fast. That fast. So here, it's the arrogance and the exceptionalism of these generals that's just nauseating. So that's one issue that was presented by this Passover event by Halevi. The second one, which is I find even more as troubling, is the notion of equality of promotion. It doesn't exist for the Dati Leumi world. And if it doesn't exist for the Dati Leumi world, it certainly is not going to exist for the Haredi. So you can't have it both ways.
I just want to explain for the benefit of our listeners who are unfamiliar with the Hebrew term Dati Leumi, that translates literally as national religious. That is to say, that sector of the population which is both, on the one hand, religiously orthodox, and on the other hand, openly and enthusiastically pro-state and Zionist in their outlook, in their self-definition and self-image. Sorry?
Correct.
As opposed to what? As opposed to another sector of the population, which is usually referred to by the Hebrew term of Haredi, which usually translates as ultra-Orthodox, who are religiously Orthodox, very much so, but not, in fact, Zionist. They would describe themselves as non-Zionist, and some of them even anti-Zionist.
Correct.
Which is something which we should touch upon later. The Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, by and large, do not serve in the military, whereas the Dati Leumi, the national religious, or Zionist religious, by and large do, in fact, overwhelmingly do. And in fact, overwhelmingly, and increasingly, the ranks of the combat troops of the army in all fields is increasingly and predominantly religious.
I've made the point that we, and I'm part of the Dati Leumi community, that we're good enough to die and be used as cannon fodder by the general staff, the left-wing, woke, progressive general staff. But we're not good enough to be promoted. Our blood is not as red. It appears that our blood is not as red, so to speak, as those of our left-wing betters.
I should sorry to interrupt, but we must rephrase that. it's not that we're not good enough. We're too good, because we have an ideology, a belief system, which is in many ways the diametric opposite of the worldview of the top brass and the Israeli deep state, and therefore we are anathema to them.
Correct, and that's why I said we're not worthy enough to be promoted. I'm talking from their standpoint. It doesn't matter how patriotic we are. It doesn't matter how brave we are. It doesn't matter how willing we are to do whatever is necessary to win. They're scared of us because our worldview, which I happen to believe is the correct one for us in Israel, is somehow viewed as prehistoric or anathema to the new age of progressive acceptance of the other as equal, as having an equal validity to the land, an equal right to the land. That's what people like Halevi and Gallant and Eisenkot and Gantz all believe. This is not about, I've argued that this is a zero-sum existential religious war. And none of the generals would ever in a million years acknowledge that. This is just a disagreement over land between two people that have equal claims to it. That's it. And we come along full of patriotism and nationalism and belief in our godly right to this land. And they look at us, they don't want us advanced. We can die, we can fight, we can win battles, but we can't advance. So this notion of equality of promotion is something that led me this week into several discussions that I never thought in a million years I would have. And I had many discussions with people, including reserve officers, Dati Leumi reserve officers, about whether or not we should put the uniform on in the absence of equality of promotion. Now, I understand that most of my friends in the Dati Leumi community will go ahead and fight regardless, because that's who we are. We fight for the land and people of Israel, Al Pi Torat Yisrael. And it doesn't matter in many instances whether we're promoted or not. But now the issue of promotion is critical. Why? Because unless we get people in place of atheists, progressive atheists, like the people that populate the high command right now,
all of whom were graduates of the various programs specifically designed for them in Harvard by the Wexner Foundation and the New Israel Fund, and by George Soros, etc. They believe in a totally different set of ideas and values.
Black and white, not blue and white, black and white. And so right now, we've seen the result of this. It's clear to anyone living here who has been witness to the atrocities that occurred on October 7th, and that all of the people arguing right now against this concern for the Gazans and how it's being used by our enemies in the West, including the Biden administration, to prevent us from winning this war by eliminating the last battalions of Hamas in Rafah, that unless these people with this mindset are removed, we will have more October 7th. This is why I'm at a crossroads myself. I'm not like a Haredi parent who feels no affinity for the state. I love this state because I view it as an expression of my Judaism, not Zionism, Judaism. And so I would want my children to fight, to wear the uniform. But right now, I just honestly, I'm having problems with this. I mean, it's like, I hate to say this, and I know I'm going to get a lot of pushback for this, but I'm just saying what I feel. I feel like a black soldier during the Second World War, an American black soldier asked to fight and die, possibly, for his country, a country that doesn't consider me equal, that treats me as something to be used and abused, but never promoted, never thanked, never given any consideration beyond, well, thanks a lot for shedding your blood. Now shut up and go home. You don't have any right to amend anything we're doing. You have no right to promotion. This is how I feel right now. I understand how black soldiers, brave, courageous black soldiers in the American Army felt, not only after the Second, but after the First World War, when they came home. After their courage and glory was basically abused, and then when they came home, they were treated as second-class citizens. That's how I feel. Well, my feeling is enough. So what am I advocating? I don't know right now, except that we have to start yelling and screaming. To the left especially, you almost destroyed this country on the basis, fighting for what you thought was demokratia, when it was anything but that. Well, we've got an issue that's 10 times more important than what you thought you were fighting for, and that's called equality of promotion. The Israeli army has always been viewed as a great leveler, sociologically, where the bank president would serve, the teller in the army. The bank president is the private, and the bank teller is the sergeant. And it would be that the army, the IDF, would always be this great social equalizer. Well, it isn't that way anymore. And I'm leaving out what these radical feminists are saying with their insanity. I'm talking about the right of a religious soldier to be promoted on the same basis as his secular colleague. Our blood is the same. Our courage is the same. Our sacrifice is the same. But we have no equality of promotion. So why am I sending my kids to an army that treats them like chattel? It's a question. If my children came to me and said, should we serve or not, I would swallow my anger and tell them, yes, of course. But in my heart, I'm saying, no, I don't want you in an army that does not treat you as an equal. I don't want you being a black soldier in a white man's army.
The problem with all of that, Jonathan, is that the national religious or Zionist religious, although I, like you, I find personally no use for the term Zionist or Zionism. I don't know what that is. I mean, I know what it is, but it's meaningless, and it's misleading because and everyone defines the word Zionism differently anyhow. Whereas Judaism, hopefully, we can define. I think at least I can define it.
I can also.
and
following you.
and I know therefore why we are here, why we have why it's our right and duty to have established and to continue to maintain a sovereign Jewish state in our homeland, which has been our homeland for 3,800 years. But the problem with all of this is that the so-called national religious, or Dati Le'umi in Hebrew, have such an overwhelming sense of nationalist, patriotic, and religious duty towards that state, towards the country, towards their people, towards Jewish history and Jewish destiny, that if they threaten not to serve, to put down arms, or just not to show up, or what have you, frankly, I don't think they'll be credible. Whereas when the left says exactly that, which is precisely what they said 1 year ago, if those in Israel here, when they nearly brought the country down and sent us into a tailspin of civil war, just about. When they say we won't serve, and people like Shikma Bresler, Shem Rashaim Yerkov, one of the heads of the progressive anti-Jewish Kaplan crowd, when she said with unbelievable audacity, or chutzpah if you prefer, to Netanyahu, come September you will have no intelligence and no military.
No army.
When they say it, it's entirely credible. I would like to remind our listeners that in every single case where an Israeli Jew was found guilty of an act of treason, going back to cases like Udi Adiv, I think his name was, or something like that, in the 70s, and there were a number of such cases. In every single case, these people came from the far left. And not in one instance was there a person from the far right or from the religious right or anything in that vicinity, in that part of the political spectrum. Never was there a case of acts of treason, of, for example, passing on information to enemy agents, etc. There is such a person right now, by the way, in prison. It's under wraps, it's under gag orders, so it's not spoken about in the media as of this moment. But there is a person, as we speak, in jail for passing on secrets to the enemy, and let's just say he's not one of ours.
No. So again, how do we get this notion of equality of promotion accepted and acted upon? The only way I can think of, Rav, to do this, given our people's total dedication to the defense of our homeland, come what may, and at whatever cost, is to get rid of those generals currently staffing the high command. They say a fish rots from its head down. All right. Well, that's the head. If you can get rid of them, and if we have an honest commission of inquiry after the war, perhaps we can accomplish that. Get rid of them all.
That's very dubious that we will have such a commission of inquiry.
I am hoping. And I understand that the last demon out of Pandora's box was hope. I understand that. And the Greeks, they were kind of crazy in a lot of ways, but they were also very realistic. But assuming we could do this, this would be the best way of ensuring equality of promotion. This is something I might add that our Haredi brothers are looking at, because they're saying, and they have said to me, if you people, meaning the Dati Leumi crowd, if you people aren't treated equally by the army, what do you think they're going to do to us? And it's a valid question. It is a very valid question.
It is.
And it's one that has to really be answered satisfactorily before we could get the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, so to speak, to consider joining the army, individually joining the army, because they've been lied to. There won't be Kol Isha, there won't be women's voices, and then all of a sudden there's a women's choir. Or there won't be kosher food when they were promised kosher food and they get treif. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So this notion,
to be fair, perhaps not treif, that is to say, totally not kosher food, but they expect a certain level of kashrut observance.
Okay, they consider it treif,
and it may have been promised to them, but it was not forthcoming.
Yeah, no. So this is why the army needs a thorough house cleaning right now. That if you're going to accept the sacrifices of my children as Dati Leumi soldiers, then you must treat them as equals. And if you're going to ask Haredim individually right now to join, you have to assure them of decent, honorable, ethical treatment. That when you promise something, that it's honored. We don't have that. There was one instance down in Tselim, in a training base, where a Sefer Torah was laid out on the ground, and the commanding officer was told his soldiers to step on it, to walk over it. I didn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it until it was proven true. And no charges were brought against that officer. He was not demoted. His promotions were not stalled or ended. Nothing happened to him. So there are real problems right now that we have that manifested themselves on October 7th. They manifested themselves. So before we turn to the Haredi community to assume their civic responsibilities, whether in the form of some kind of national service or being in the army or something, we have to clean up our own camp. And that means the Cheloni, the left wing, have to recognize the fact that a great many of them, almost as many as the Haredim, that don't join the army when they're of age, come up with all these crazy psychological problems. They're weak mentally. They're scared of being in the army, or they just leave to go to Chutz La'aretz, to the United States or other places. All of these things have to be corrected, and they can be if you have a government dedicated to it, and if you have a military whose high command is also dedicated to it. But right now, I'm really having a problem over this, because Chetzi Halevi just acted as just like the high court, like nobody's going to tell him what to do. He's above it all, that the high command is above it all. And we see this with the way they fought the war. They are fighting the war in Gaza without any regard at all for the lives of our soldiers, but they do pay a lot of respect to what the Americans are saying and the way that we're not fighting the war up in the north against Hezbollah. And also, thirdly, against this, what we can see in the territories right now, where the army and the police and security forces are, quote, waiting for an October 7th to occur, rather than preempting it or preventing it from happening by going after the terrorist organizations with a decisive anti-terror campaign. All of these problems can be boiled back down to this idea of an inequality of promotion. Because what it's a manifestation of is a mindset that you have pointed out repeatedly is not appropriate and does not actually reflect the feelings of the great majority of Israeli people. You know, these guys are woke, they're progressive, they live in an altered reality, they've been propagandized by left-wing organizations.
For example, let me just add fuel to your argument and proof, adduce proof. Former Chief of Staff Eisenkot spent much more time and energy making arrangements for female soldiers to be added into previously only male units, like the Karakal unit and others, as part of the general woke, progressive, equality, diversity, what have you, values that were inculcated in him by the Wexner Foundation and Harvard and Soros, rather than ensuring that what happened on Shmini Atzeret on the 7th of October would never happen.
Correct.
It has to be understood. The main requirement and qualification for promotion to the upper echelons of the military for the past 30 years, in fact, much longer than that, but let's just say for the last 30 years, because it's 30.5 years ago that since the Oslo Accords. Since that time, most definitely, without the slightest doubt, the major qualification for promotion was that you are an Osloist, that you accept the premise of Oslo. What is the premise of Oslo? It is what you mentioned earlier, Jonathan. It is the claim that this is some kind of dispute over real estate between two groups, both of whom have legitimate claims. And therefore, for example, establishing the PA, the so-called Palestinian Authority, and guaranteeing its continued existence is uppermost in the minds of these people. They cannot imagine a reality where there is no PA, and to be honest, no Hamas, because it's all the same thing. Hamas and PA just work hand in hand. It was just recently announced that, for example, that 65% of all I'm not going to use the word terror attacks. That was the term used in the news report, but I don't call it terror. We're at war. We've been at war for 200 years of this country, and we still are at war. Over 65% of, shall we say, we'll call them shooting attacks or military-style attacks against Jews in Yudan Shomron and the territories were
PA security service
perpetrated by so-called PA policemen and security apparatus personnel.
And these are the ones that Gallant wants to put into Gaza to replace Hamas.
Not just Gallant.
And not just Gallant.
Netanyahu also, apparently.
That's his concept, or I call it his misconceptia. And this is his Canton, what's been called his Canton plan.